Welcome back, E7 fam, to another how to play video. My name is Pat, and in this one we'll be covering the much requested girl who taught us all the meaning of the word you googly, Diene. As with all of the how to play videos here on this channel, I'll be going super in depth and covering almost everything you could want to know about the character, including things like stats, skills, possible endgame equipment builds for you to try out, some PvP matchup knowledge if that's your thing, and even something like the character's voice actors. I cover as much stuff as you could possibly want to know about the character. So if you're new here and have never seen one of these videos, consider leaving me a like or a subscribe. Helps me out a ton here and lets me continue to bring out quality content like this one. So with the introduction out of the way, let's talk about Diene's stats. Diene is an Ice Soul Weaver of the Gemini zodiac symbol. She shares a stat line with Emilia as well as Elena. Taking a look at those stats, she has 649 attack, 5,254 health, 103 speed, 694 defense, 15% critical hit chance, 150% critical hit damage, 5% dual attack chance, no effectiveness, and 18 starting effect resistance. Overall, a very poor stat line for a 5-star in Epic 7. However, it is a fairly good stat line for a 5-star Soul Weaver. The highlights include the starting effect resistance, the almost 700 starting defense, and the 103 base speed, which is actually fairly fast for a Soul Weaver. As a bit of trivia before moving on to the skills section, Diene in the English dub of Epic 7 is voiced by Elise Napier, who has since left the voiceover acting industry. Going forward, all new lines for Diene as well as all versions of Tenebria will be voiced by Noelle Ill. In the Japanese version of Epic 7, however, Diene is voiced by one of the very best in Chiwa Saito, an actress who is so good at her job that in the Monogatari franchise, her character Senjo Gahara exclaims, "My voice actress is excellent." You can also hear her as Homura in the very popular Madoka Magica, as well as in the objectively best wife, as well as upcoming VTuber, Tamamo no Mae from the Fate franchise. Diene's S1 is Light of Judgment. It has a 1x attack multiplier. It increases the combat readiness of Diene by 10 to 15% depending on Molagora. Additionally, if Diene has one or more buffs, this combat readiness boost is doubled, essentially changing it from a 10 to 15% to a 20 to 30% CR push.
I believe this is what the goddess wills.
Diene's S2 is Blessings of the Goddess. You acquire 2 souls upon use, and it has a 3 to 4 turn cooldown depending on Molagora. It dispels up to 2 debuffs from all allies before granting each ally a barrier for 2 turns. The barrier strength is equal to 20 to 30% of each ally's maximum HP depending on Molagora.
Give me strength. Let's advance together.
We've talked about this barrier before in How to Play Mediator Koeric. It's one of the very best in the entire game. 30% of each ally's maximum HP is no joke. It provides quite a bit of survivability, which is really good because Diene naturally has no healing in her kit. You'll need to use things like the Artifact Rod of Amaryllis if you want to accomplish that. Even if you don't need the healing though, this barrier as well as how fast Diene cycles through her turns should keep your team in pretty much tip-top shape and make it very difficult for any opponent to actually kill you. Diene's S3 is Saint's Prayer. You acquire 2 to 4 souls depending on Molagora when you use it, and it has a 4 to 5 turn cooldown also depending on Molagora. It grants all allies an attack buff and a critical hit resistance buff for 3 turns. Additionally, after using this non-attack skill, Diene will get a 50% combat readiness increase. This is a very strong S3 as it gives not only an attack buff for 3 turns, but also a critical hit resistance buff for 3 turns. Most attack buffs in Epic 7 usually only last between 1 and 2 turns, and this one lasts 3, so having it up for a long time is really good. We always talk about how great attack buff is here on this channel. The kicker though is that 3-turn critical hit resistance buff. When it's combined with something like the barriers from her S2 Blessings of the Goddess, it makes it incredibly difficult to reliably push through damage until the crit resistance buff is actually down on her. The problem with that though is that this character is incredibly fast and cycles turns very quickly thanks to all the free combat readiness she has in her kit, which means that opponents may never actually get an attack to land. They cannot safely push through this critical hit resistance. There's just never going to be an opportunity for them. So that's really, really good for you as the Diene player, as most attacks are going to be reduced to essentially coin flips to see if they're going to hit for big damage. This move is also really, really good when combined with the artifact Magaraha's Tome, as it will give you 80% combat readiness push right at the start. This means you can fire off her S2 immediately, and we'll talk more about why that's good in the next section when we talk about exclusive equipments. Diene's Soulburn reduces the cooldown of all of her skills by 2 turns when she uses her S3 Saint's Prayer. Really, really excellent Soulburn for keeping not only your buffs up, but also allowing you to cycle turns very, very quickly. It can also be useful for proccing a lot of non-attack skill triggers to use with something like, say, the artifact Rod of Amaryllis, so you can actually keep your team topped off. Also good for things like, say, maybe Edda, for example, to keep boosting her to the top with her pseudo-passive on her S3. Really, really good. You should use it if you feel that you actually need it. Finally, let's talk about Molagora priorities. The first one that I would max is the S3 Saint's Prayer for not only the increased souls, but obviously the cooldown. You want to get this move up as early and often as possible. After that, invest in her S2 Blessings of the Goddess for not only the cooldown, but the barrier strength. It's one of the best barriers in the entire game, so there really should be no reason for you to not max this out. The barrier is one of the main reasons to actually play this character. After that, I think you should go to at least +5 in the S1 Light of Judgment. I feel like normally you don't care about damage on Soul Weavers, but that combat readiness is huge. Diene will almost always have a buff, which means on her off turns when she is using her S1, you're going to be leaving anywhere between 6 and 10% combat readiness on the table, and that can actually cost you a couple of games. So I do think you want to take this up to at least +5, and I do think you want to take this character to at least +13. Before we move on to character builds, we have to look at Diene's exclusive equipment, which is Halted Pocket Watch. And admittedly, this exclusive equipment is the primary reason that we are making this video. It gives 5 to 10 speed, and for all the calculations in this video, I'm assuming that you have a 10 speed Halted Pocket Watch. Anytime, by the way, you see speed on an exclusive equipment, you immediately have to take note of what character ended up getting it, because it opens up a whole new speed tier for them, and essentially will catapult them most likely to the forefront of some kind of metagame or some area of the game, at least until Smilegate and Super Creative decide to actually acknowledge the fact that maybe speed is too good and most of the best characters in the game are played at a very high speed bracket. With that out of the way, let's take a look at the options. The first one changes it so that the S1 Light of Judgment gives an extra 5% combat readiness to the ally on your team with the highest attack, and if Diene has a buff, that effect is doubled to 10%. I actually think this one is pretty good for the most part. It is being overlooked entirely because of the third exclusive equipment option, which we'll talk about in a second. But I do think that this is a pretty solid option because Diene usually is in a weird spot where she has 1 to 2 turns where she's not really doing anything. So being able to essentially turn her S1 into a pseudo mediator Choleric S1 is always valuable. I think time will tell how good this one actually is once people get some more time with it and more testing, but I do think it is very, very good. The second exclusive equipment changes it so that the S2 barrier from Blessings of the Goddess is increased by 10%. It's a fine exclusive equipment. The problem is it's up against the first and the third option, both of which I think are exceedingly good. I think that the second option is only really for new players who are using Diene in PvE and need that extra oomph, that extra survivability to survive. Otherwise, I think you're better off going with the third option, which makes it so that when you use the S2 Blessings of the Goddess, you increase the combat readiness of all allies on your team by 15%. This one is pretty ridiculous because now that Diene, who was already basically the fastest Soul Weaver, has 10 extra speed thanks to her exclusive equipment and 15 extra speed due to the current season's Soul Weaver Battle Frenzy bonus, you have a character that is very fast and can very easily get up there in speed with somebody like Conqueror Lilius. And therefore, if you give her a CR push to the whole team on the S2, a really fast Diene is now able to essentially basically take the first turn or deny a first turn from a character like Pera and let her team basically kind of like reap the benefits. Really strong S3, and if you are PvP focused at all, I think this is the one to choose. And a lot of the build paths that we talk about in the next section stem from the fact that this S2 is just so good with her as an opener. I joked in the custom group summon video that Diene was worth picking up because she might make a return to form in the World Championship this year. Man, do I hate being right sometimes. Anyways, for much of this game's lifespan, Diene has been a staple in PvP as well as PvE. She provides a slew of the game's best buffs and support skills all in one small speedy package. Just when you think she's about to leave the metagame and be benched for good, she always finds a way to come roaring back to life. This time, her exclusive equipment is the reason for her return to prominence, and it's already making big waves. In the most recent Content Creator Invitational, she had a 100% ban rate, and that is something to take note of. When a whole host of Legend players don't want to play against a specific character, it speaks volumes to how good that character actually is. The 10 speed as well as the combat readiness push afforded to Diene from Halted Pocket Watch has made her not only a monster support once again in PvP, but a possible opener as well. The Battle Frenzy changes of the current season that this guide is being made in have made it possible for Diene to almost break the sound barrier, so to speak. The fastest ones come clocking in at a whopping 300 plus speed. That's insane to think about when you consider that this character has a lowly 103 base speed. Looking at PvE again, Diene is one of the most successful heroes that we've ever had, being an excellent option for new players in things like Wyvern, Brutal Ferris, and even Hellraid. Her most common PvE use, however, is as a premier support in Abyss levels, where she is used to tackle some of the game's hardest content. No matter what your goals are in Epic 7, Diene is an excellent character to have built for nearly every player. She wasn't the game's original top tier for no reason. It's been almost 3 years and she's still here. We'll start with Diene by talking about her meta PvP build before I show you a second balance type build that you can mold to fit your specific needs. Let's take a look at that PvP build though first. For the current meta PvP Speedy Diene, she is going to be on a speed set with a resist offset. If for some reason you do not have very fast resist pieces, you can use either health set, defense set, or even something like broken set. Taking a look at the desired stats, she has 1,265 attack. This is a level 60 6-star Awoken Diene with an I-90 weapon with a plus 30 of her artifact Magaraha's Tome, which is what we're using for this build. Taking a look at the defense, we have 1500 defense. That is so that she has some level of bulk and doesn't take a ton of damage and can survive for a very long time. If you can't hit this because it impacts your speed too much, try for 1350 instead. For the health, I have 15k or better. I have seen ones that go a little bit lower than this, but I don't think you really want a Diene that's crazy fast and has no bulk. I still think you want her to be fast and have some level of bulk, and I think 15k or better really helps accomplish that. For speed, I have 260 here. That includes the exclusive equipment as well as the speed set bonus. So anything over 260 is better. If you can't get it, obviously you can go a little bit lower in the 250s. If you're going much lower than that, I think you really should focus on the second build that we'll be talking about. Obviously, if your gear allows it, you can go way higher than this. I have seen ones that are in the 280s. So that way, when we factor in the speed set that we get from the Battle Frenzy, she's almost over 300 or over 300. So again, it's going to depend entirely on your gear. This character is not a damage dealer, so we don't need any critical hit chance or damage. She doesn't have any debuffs, so effectiveness doesn't matter as well. Effect resistance, I have 103%. That is her base effect resistance with an effect resistance ring, as well as the resist set factored in. This is so that we have some level of effect resistance against DPS and their debuffs, and you might have a chance to get some of the lesser geared openers, the ones that don't have a ton of effectiveness built. They're just trying to go for speed. So depending on what tier you're at, this might be helpful for you. I personally would like this to be over like 260 or 270 if you can actually get it, and that is because of Conqueror Lilius, because most of them build between 70 and 100 effectiveness, and that gives you a pretty good wiggle room so that way you don't actually get provoked by her at the start of the fight in case she actually outspeeds you. Taking a look at the right side gear, I'm on an HP percentage necklace. The ring is effect resistance, although if for some reason you don't care about effectiveness at all, or I should say effect resistance at all, and just want to go as fast as possible and get her bulky, you just are just going to forego effect resistance whatsoever, you can play an HP percentage ring to get her really, really tanky. For boots, I'm on speed because obviously this is the build that's trying to go zoom zoom. Speaking of zoom zoom, for the artifact, Molagora Tome synergizes incredibly well with Diene. After you use her S3, you get 80% combat readiness, which means that it's most likely going to be her turn immediately again, which allows you to get the crit resist buff up, the attack buff up, as well as the barriers and the CR push from the exclusive equipment right away. It's also a 4-star, which means everyone has access to this, so that's why I chose it for this. Although personally, after having played with Magtome, I think it is insane. I personally prefer the tried and true Rod of Amaryllis, and if that's more your speed, you can go for it. Just recognize that the Diene, you'll have more longevity, but she won't be as insane at the start of the fight as she would be with Molagora Tome. So that is an option. If for some reason you don't have Magtome and you don't have Rod of Amaryllis, Celestine has always been a backup that you can use on Diene. You could also use Bastion of Hope if you went to go for that higher effect resistance. Taking a look at the per piece average, we have 14% defense, 10% HP, 16 speed, and the last slot is going to be a dump stat, which in this case should be effect resistance. The second build to look at is what I'm going to be calling a build-a-balanced Diene build, because this character has so many variations and it's going to depend entirely on your playstyle, on what you actually want to do with the character. If you're a PvE player, obviously you don't care too much about speed. You would rather have more bulk, defense, effect resistance, things like that. And if you're somebody who wants to use your Diene everywhere, your needs might be a bit different. Say you already have other openers, you don't need a fast one. Yeah, that's pretty much where we're going with this stat line, and I'll talk about the various breakpoints and things like that, and you can decide where you really want to take the Diene from there. I'm still on speed resist set, although you can play a counter set, especially if you decide to play her on an artifact like Celestine. That is a viable option at certain tiers in PvP, and it's obviously going to be okay for certain things like Abyss if you decide to use Diene as a frontliner, for example. So yeah, again, that is an option that you can certainly do, but for most people, I think speed resist is still the best option. Taking a look at the desired stats here, I have 1,291 attack. This is still the 6-star Diene with the I-90 weapon. However, the artifact has changed to Rod of Amaryllis, as I do think overall that is the best artifact on the character if you're trying to play a Diene that is good in both PvE as well as PvP, because it's excellent pretty much everywhere. It might not be the best everywhere, but it's one of the best options pretty much everywhere. Looking at the defense, I still have 1,500 defense. If you want a tankier Diene that takes less damage overall, you can obviously shoot for 1,800. For health, I have 17k here. That is going to be a bit tankier than the speedier build so that she lives a bit longer, especially if you're again trying to play her in something like Abyss. If you don't want any effect resistance at all, if you already have a dedicated cleanser, or you're playing her in, say, PvE where there's not really any debuffs, you can crank this up even higher. I have seen Dienes go over 21k HP, and you'll get that if you swap to a health ring, for example. So if you were looking for more health, try to shoot for 21k instead of the 17 that I have here. For speed, I have 240. That is factoring in the speed set as well as the exclusive equipment. If you're going to be on counter set, you can shoot for something like, say, 210 to 220, somewhere in that range. The speed at 240 is basically coming from the fact that most Dienes for a very long time were around 225 to 230 speed as a general use Diene that was used in not only Abyss, but also certain levels of Arena and World Arena and Guild Wars. So naturally, adding 10 more speed from the exclusive equipment lets us arrive at this 240. That's where we get this number from. If you want to go faster, by all means. If you don't really care about PvP at all, you can obviously drop it a bit lower to get other stats higher. Again, character doesn't have any debuffs or damage, so critical hit, chance, and damage are still going to be the base values. For effect resistance, 150% I think is a really good starting point for a lot of players that are trying to play Diene as kind of like a pseudo cleanser or as a support, because it puts you out of range of a lot of the bruisers and a lot of the DPS in the game from getting debuffed, and allows her to really leverage that dispel that she has on her S2. As you go higher in tiers of play, if you want this character to be a cleanser, she's going to need to be over 200%, and she might even need the Bastion artifact in order to get over to like 270 or 280. Again, depends entirely on what you're trying to do. Taking a look at the right side gear, the necklace is still going to be HP percentage. For ring, I'm still on effect resistance because that is the most balanced type Diene if we're trying to play her as kind of like a support that can also cleanse and be kind of tanky. I still think it's the best option. If you have a dedicated cleanser and you don't need your Diene to have any effect resistance, by all means shoot for that HP percentage ring to get that 21k plus HP. Boots is still speed, so she takes turns in a timely fashion. For the artifact, we're on Rod of Amaryllis for the reasons I just talked about a couple minutes ago. Artifacts here that you can also play. Magtome, still very, very good if you already have a dedicated healer and you're trying to play her in PvE. For example, if you play her with like Montmorency on Rod of Amaryllis and Diene on Magtome, that is a very potent combination, and it has been good on certain Abyss floors in the past. You can also play Celestine as a fallback, and we've already talked about Bastion of Hope if you're trying to go for that cleanser build. It's just not written here because I simply just don't have the space to include it. Looking at the per piece average, we have 14% defense, 17% HP, 11 speed or better or worse depending on what you're looking for, and then 10% effect resistance, and you can obviously juice that up higher if you're trying to make her your cleanser. Diene is an incredibly good character in Epic 7. She's been top tier for almost the entirety of the game's lifespan. And for nearly 3 years, for a character to be top tier, you'd expect that she works very well with almost every single character in the cast and in a variety of situations. And that is most certainly true. You can play almost anything with Diene and find success. But where I really think she has the most success is in a Protect the Queen or Protect the King style composition. You want to pair her with characters that provide damage mitigation, which stack with her critical hit resist and barriers. So for that reason, I really recommend pairing her with characters like Adventurer Raz or Fallen Cecilia. Adventurer Raz is a great free-to-play option. He can hold Arius for you, which will help with that protection style comp. He also provides you with a defense buff, and since Diene is very good at protecting a hard carry, Raz is great at, pulling that hard carry in for bonus damage with his S2 command strike. So I really like him as well. Fallen Cecilia is just the best damage mitigation source in the game, and her barriers can stack with Diene's barriers and make it an absolute pain for your opponent to actually kill your damage dealers and get them off the board. For those actual hard carry DPS that you want to pair her with, I think she works incredibly well with Landy. Landy is probably the best character you can pick her with, and honestly, Landy wasn't doing super well in the meta. She was like a fringe playable unit. With Diene being in the meta, you're starting to see Landy come back in full force. Spectre Tenebria, obviously another top tier damage dealer, works incredibly well with Diene. Very difficult to actually kill her with AoE attacks if she's got crit resist and barriers, so that's another one you can consider. And finally, there's another Moonlight 5-star like Bellion that can work super well against bruiser comps. If you have an injury Bellion and you are protecting her with an Arius holder as well as Diene, it's going to be incredibly difficult for your opponent to kill someone that is as bulky as Bellion, and you'll be able to draw the game out long enough to essentially get the win off of the injury stacks. For good matchups, there are a lot of them for Diene. It's honestly a lot faster to name her bad matchups than all of her good matchups. So I'm going to try to keep this section pretty much very brief, explain to you the general gist of when you're going to want to play Diene, and then just as long as you're dodging the bad matchups, it's fine. In general, Diene excels against mostly single target damage dealing teams that do not have a way to get to the hard carry that she is protecting. If they don't have a tank buster, they're in for a really bad time if you have an Arius holder and Diene on your team. So I think that's really where you want to be picking her, where she really shines. Depending on how you have her built, she's also a fairly competent solution to certain openers like Peyra and Angel of Light Angelica. If you have a high enough effect resistance and you're playing her on, say, something like Bastion of Hope to give her bonus ER, you can use her kind of like a pseudo counter to those characters. Both of them have exactly 2 debuffs in their opening skills in their kit, and you can use Diene's S2 to essentially get around that and cleanse it, so that is a pretty good option. However, if you do not have a lot of effect resistance on your Diene, these instantly become bad matchups as well because they give unbuffable and they can remove the rest of your buffs from your team. So again, it's going to depend entirely on how you have Diene built. In general, like I said, a lot faster to just name the bad matchups than the good ones. Just stick to, like I said, teams that are very low damage and don't have any tank busting capabilities, and I think you'll be fine with Diene. All right, and finally, here is a fairly extensive list of bad matchups for Diene. It's not everyone, but it's most of the ones that I could think of, and it's quite long. As long as you're avoiding these characters, I think you are primarily fine. Or if you are not able to avoid them, at least have an answer for them. So the first two to talk about are Landy and Rimuru Tempest. These are characters that get significantly stronger the more buffs are on the enemy team. Landy's full burst, in tandem with her S2 passive, the Chief is on the scene, will eventually whittle down the Diene team. No matter how much you have in barriers, no matter how many crit resist buffs you have, eventually the dam's going to have to break, and Landy will just wipe your entire team. She really preys upon characters like Diene. She's kind of designed to counter those style of characters. Rimuru is the same. He can pocket, obviously, all of the buffs that you give for your team for his team, and his S3, Devour Black Flame, gets stronger the more buffs are on his team, so he is really looking forward to playing against a character like Diene. Obviously, Diene also is a non-attack skill hero, so characters like Politis, Celine, and Teiyu also enter the picture. How good they are going to be against your composition depends on what characters you have, what characters your opponent has. It's really important that you know what all three of these characters do and where the interaction points are, because, for example, a character like Celine might not actually be a factor for you when you're playing Diene, so you might not need to worry about her. But again, it's going to depend on what other characters are on your team. Diene is a character that gives barriers, so therefore a character like Operator Sigret obviously enters the picture here. She has a really strong S2 that is a 100% defense penetration if it attacks a character with a barrier, and she can obviously, use her S3 to remove buffs from your team as well as give her team buffs. So she's one that you want to be on the lookout for as well. Specific openers also are very good against Diene. I think Conqueror Lilius is the one that is the most obvious to me, because a lot of Conqueror Lilius play between like 70 to 120% effectiveness, and the way that most of the faster Dienes that are trying to speed contest are built, they don't have enough resistance to reliably dodge the S2 provoke on Conqueror Lilius. So I think this is one that you want to be aware of if you are going to be trying to play Diene as a speed contester. Obviously, she has an S3 that gives her team buffs as well as minimizes the buffs that are on your team. We already talked about Peyra and Angel of Light Angelica in the previous section. Based on how you actually have Diene built, these could be either very good or very bad matchups for you. Other characters with unbuffable that are something that you should be aware of are characters like Briar Witch Asaria. It's not a common thing, but it can actually wreck your entire team, especially if you miss sequence with Diene. If you put up all of your buffs and blow your barrier way too early, she might just strip them all, and then your Diene is kind of useless, and your team is looking pretty weak until you are able to cycle your skills back around. And then the final one that I have to highlight, because it was the classic answer to Diene in the past, and it made a resurfacing at the most recent Content Creator Invitational, is Basar. Basar is a low-key slept-on character right now. He is usually played very slow. You can't really play him as an opener, but he still does just have insane stats. He has very high attack, very high defensive stats for a mage, and his soul burn essentially guarantees that he's going to be able to strip all the buffs that your Diene has, and essentially he's kind of like a wall breaker. Any protection that your hard carries were getting from your tank as well as Diene is just gone as long as he enters the picture. So a well-picked Basar can absolutely be devastating to Diene and her comrades. And that is going to do it for how to play Diene. If I missed anything, as always, let me know down in the comments below, and let me know what other characters you want to see on an upcoming episode of How to Play. If you think this video will help someone else, feel free to share it with them. And as always, you can check out a playlist on your screen now with all of the How to Play videos that I've done thus far. As always, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.